power is not loud, it's controlled. Denzel Washington once said that. This is the moment he proved it. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. It was just after 8 a.m. in Scottsdale, Arizona. The studio was quiet, but not calm. Too many people moving too fast for that. Crew walked with purpose. Cables snapped into place. Lighting checked and rechecked. Everyone knew today would be different. They just didn't know how yet. Denzel Washington arrived early. Not early like 5 minutes ahead. Early like 20. The kind of early that says something's on your mind. He didn't bring a team. Didn't ask for makeup. Didn't shake hands with the showrunner. Or flash a smile to the assistant with the clipboard. He just walked in, nodded once to the first crew member who made eye contact, and took a seat in the green room, alone. A worn leather folder rested on his lap. His right thumb tapped it rhythmically. 4 taps. Pause. 4 taps again. No music in his ears. But something was playing in his head, something only he could hear. He didn't look nervous. He looked ready. Ready in the way a man looks when he's walked this road before. When he knows the fight won't be loud, but the stakes will be real. One junior tech leaned toward another near the boom stand and whispered, "Is he always this quiet before panels?" Denzel heard it. He didn't turn, didn't respond, just kept tapping. 8 minutes later, Jasmine Crockett swept in. Like a gust of perfectly timed campaign wind. Laughter first, then a burst of energy behind her. Staff, assistants, someone with iced coffee, someone else with a backup blouse still on a hanger. She was all rhythm and charm, a line to the producer, a joke to the sound guy. She filled the makeup room like it was a stage and she already owned it. She glanced at Denzel once, half a second, and looked right past him. No nod, no word, just air. He didn't move, didn't blink, just one more tap. 4 beats, pause, 4 more. The producer, clipboard in hand, called out timing. "We're live in 30, you'll be mic'd in 10. Jasmine smiled, flipped her hair gently away from her mic line, and asked if the studio lighting had been adjusted since her last visit. Denzel sat back, still alone, still silent. The folder never left his hands. It wasn't flashy, nothing gold embossed or special, but it was old, worn. The edges frayed just enough to say it had been opened and closed hundreds of times. Something about it didn't feel like a prop, it felt like a weapon. Or maybe a shield. 10 minutes before airtime, a runner approached with a mic pack. "Mr. Washington, we'll clip you now." Denzel nodded once. Calm, deliberate. He stood up, smoothed the front of his charcoal jacket, pressed but not overstyled, and attached the mic himself. No assistance, no fuss. Then just before stepping toward the studio floor, he turned to the lead producer. "Quick note," he said, his voice low, steady. "There's a document I might hand to the moderator during the segment. It's relevant, factual, won't derail the flow." The producer raised one eyebrow. "As long as it stays on message." "It will," Denzel said. "It'll clarify it." Then he walked to set. No dramatic entrance, no scanning the room. He didn't need to. He already knew what it would feel like. Polished, tense, hungry for a soundbite. Jasmine was already seated. She was checking her mic in the monitor, adjusting the collar of her blouse with camera-friendly precision. She saw him approach. Didn't stand, didn't speak, but her smile widened slightly. She was ready too. "Oh, you finally brought notes," she said, her tone soft enough to seem playful, but sharp enough for the cameras to catch it. Denzel didn't blink. "Always have," he replied, pulling out the chair beside her. "Just never needed them for you." Someone on crew stifled a cough. One of the lighting assistants glanced at the camera operator. The moderator flipped through his cards, quickly double-checking the order. Denzel sat, folded the worn folder open on the desk in front of him, and stared at the first page. Not reading it, just looking. Like the lines were burned in already. Jasmine crossed one leg over the other and adjusted the angle of her body toward the host, not him. Neither of them moved again. 3 minutes to air. No one said another word. And still the room got louder. The red light blinked on. Cameras rolled. The moderator welcomed the audience with practiced ease, his voice crisp, clear, measured. "Good morning and welcome. Today we're joined by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas and former White House Assistant Press Secretary Denzel Washington." Polite nods. Jasmine gave a composed smile, the kind built for live TV. Denzel didn't smile, just a small tilt of the head. No overperformance, no wasted energy. The first question was safe, a lead-in about border policy. Jasmine responded first, offering a polished policy-heavy take. Nothing controversial, just the kind of language that blends nicely into morning programming. Then Denzel spoke, and everything shifted. He didn't just answer, he took command. His words clipped but fluid, direct but magnetic. He started with stats, pivoted to story, then dropped a soundbite so clean it felt like it had been test-driven in 3 focus groups. The moderator nodded, impressed. Jasmine didn't flinch. The next few questions came fast. Education, healthcare, federal oversight. Each time, Denzel jumped in early, not interrupting, just arriving first. He filled the air with polished certainty, talking in that controlled rhythm of a man who had learned, through years of press briefings and primetime interviews, that pace can be power. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The moderator asked, "How do we make space for productive disagreement in an increasingly divided political climate?" Denzel didn't wait. By remembering disagreement isn't disrespect, but dodging accountability. That's disrespectful. And we've seen too much of that lately, from both sides of the aisle. It landed like a thesis, firm, balanced, undeniable. He looked straight at the camera as he said it, not at Jasmine, but the message was there, just enough air of superiority to feel like a jab. Jasmine picked up her pen, clicked it once, then let it rest again on the table. She didn't bite, not yet. The moderator glanced her way, but pivoted again. Back to Denzel. He was on a roll. His voice moved like a metronome, steady, intentional, rehearsed. He leaned forward just slightly. "I've debated senators sharper than this," he said, not looking at anyone, but letting it hang. A couple of crew members widened their eyes off camera. Jasmine blinked once. That was it. The remark didn't provoke a gasp or a viral meltdown. It wasn't meant to. It was strategic. The kind of comment that could be walked back later if pressed. "Oh, I didn't mean her." But everyone in the room knew what he meant. Jasmine tapped her pen again. Still no reaction. No counterpunch. She wasn't here to spar with noise. Because Denzel, he thought he had the rhythm. He thought he was winning. 3 more questions came, 3 more answers from him that danced between charm and condescension. Jasmine spoke but briefly. He jumped in again, loud enough to command, soft enough to claim plausible deniability. This was the move: cut her time down without cutting her off, drown her tone without touching her microphone. And it was working, at least on the surface. The audience would think he was simply passionate. The producers were smiling. His team offset would be texting fire emojis by now. But the thing is, when someone's too busy performing, they stop listening. And Jasmine, she'd been listening since the first question, not to what he was saying, but how. He talked like the room was his, like the narrative already belonged to him, but he hadn't noticed her pen. He hadn't seen her glance once, not at the moderator, not at him, but at the folder on her lap, the one no one had noticed she brought in. Because while he was playing chess with sound bites, she was waiting for the board to crack. 2 minutes later, it would. But in this moment right here, Denzel thought he was untouchable. He leaned back, eyes half-lidded in a mix of calm and control, and delivered one last polished zinger. "The real problem," he said, "isn't disagreement. It's when people mistake emotion for conviction. Yelling louder doesn't make you right." Jasmine didn't look up, but she smiled, soft, almost imperceptible. Not because he was wrong, but because he'd just stepped on the very tripwire she'd placed in silence. The folder shifted slightly in her lap, just enough. No one noticed, except her. The moment arrived quietly. The moderator, unaware of the trap that had been set, turned calmly toward the Congresswoman. "Congresswoman Crockett, would you like to respond to Mr. Washington's point?" Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't shift in her seat or adjust her mic. She simply reached down, lifted the folder from her lap, and placed it gently on the table. Her hands moved slowly, precisely, not for drama but for clarity. "I would," she said, her voice smooth, composed. "But before I respond to his opinion, maybe we should talk about the real reason he's so loud about mine." A pause followed. Not tension, a vacuum. Like the room inhaled and forgot to exhale. Jasmine opened the folder and removed a single sheet of paper. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't wave it or hold it in the air. She just passed it across the table to the moderator. No flair, just a handoff. "This," she said calmly, "is an internal memo circulated 2 weeks ago. His team signed off on it." The moderator took it, puzzled, beginning to scan. Jasmine continued, voice still level. "It outlines a media strategy, one specifically targeting minority female representatives. Not based on policy, but tone. The goal, paint us as aggressive, irrational, unstable, especially when we push back." Denzel didn't speak at first. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. The moderator's eyebrows furrowed as he read the first few lines. Jasmine didn't stop. "It wasn't supposed to go public, but someone sent it to me. I didn't say anything, not until I verified it. And now that I have, if we're going to talk on live television, let's actually talk." That's when Denzel snapped. "You're lying," he said sharply. "This is a setup." His voice cracked. not just with anger, but something breaking beneath it. He turned toward the moderator, then toward the producers off camera. He looked for a way out, but there wasn't one. He stood halfway up, like his body wanted to flee, then sat down again, as if gravity had other plans. "You think you can smear me with some fake piece of paper?" he barked. "You're just playing the victim again." But Jasmine didn't move. She didn't raise her voice, didn't gloat, didn't blink. "I'm not playing anything," she said. "I'm reading your strategy, and if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe ask yourself why it was written." Silence, then chaos. The moderator, flustered, tried to redirect. "Okay, let's pause for a second. Let's make sure this is verified." But it was too late. Denzel had already ripped his mic off. His hands moved in quick, jerky motions. He stood again, but didn't leave the frame. He started pacing, a few feet back, then forward, then again. "She set me up," he muttered. "Not to the camera, not to anyone in particular. She knew I couldn't defend that without looking guilty. That was the point. That was the whole damn point." Someone in the control room made a motion to cut the feed. Another producer shook their head. This was ratings gold. On camera, the moderator attempted damage control. "Let's take a quick break." But they didn't cut fast enough. 14 seconds passed before the screen finally faded to commercial, and that was all the world needed. Those 14 seconds, the pacing, the muttering, the visible unraveling of a man known for his discipline, hit the internet within minutes. The clip went viral before the segment even finished airing on the West Coast. But it wasn't just the meltdown that lit the match. It was the paper, that memo, a single page, not yelled, not dramatized, just calmly delivered in a room full of microphones. And for the first time in a long time, people didn't remember what was said. They remembered what wasn't, because Jasmine Crockett didn't argue. She exposed, and Denzel Washington didn't lose control. He surrendered it. By 10 a.m., the clip was already circulating. Not just on Twitter. It hit Instagram reels, cable morning shows, group chats, Reddit, even a Cleveland radio segment hosted by two dads who usually just talked football. But it wasn't the confrontation people were sharing, not the yelling, not the pacing, not even the 14 seconds of uncensored meltdown. It was the silence, the stillness of Jasmine Crockett as she slid that paper across the table. Her hand steady, her tone clear, the way she didn't react when Denzel unraveled right in front of her. People watched it again and again, not because it was explosive, but because it wasn't. In Dallas, a retired high school teacher reposted the clip with the caption, "My whole career, I was told to stay calm while being provoked. Jasmine just showed the world what that really looks like." In Bakersfield, a college sophomore wrote, "This wasn't just political, it was personal. It's how people weaponize calmness and call it professionalism, only when it works for them." In Atlanta, an executive sent the clip to her entire staff, writing only, "This is what composure looks like when the room is built to make you lose it." The memo had a watermark, a date, 3 initials from senior staff. People zoomed in, froze frames. Bloggers compared fonts to leaked emails. Verified insiders whispered, "It's real." And then came the leaks, Slack messages, screenshots, snippets of old communications from campaign staffers that used the exact language Jasmine had quoted. Emotionally unstable when cornered, too reactive, predictable outrage. It wasn't just a strategy, it was a formula. By noon, commentators on both sides of the political aisle were asking, how many teams were using tactics like this? How long had this been going on? Who else had been targeted and written off as angry instead of right? But louder than all that was the question no one wanted to admit, had always been in the air. How many times had someone like Jasmine been gaslit out of credibility? Not for what she said, but for how she said it. A slow reckoning began. Panel clips resurfaced, moments where women had been interrupted, cut off, called emotional, just for raising their voices a notch. Viewers connected dots they hadn't seen before. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't post a victory video or accept interviews. She didn't retweet the praise or monetize the moment. She simply went back to work. But her silence after the storm hit even harder than the memo itself. It told people, this wasn't a moment, it was a mirror. And once you look into that kind of mirror, once you recognize how many times you've swallowed the urge to speak louder, just to seem rational, you can't unsee it, you carry it. That's what started happening, quietly, everywhere. At a community college in Ohio, a student printed the memo and taped it to the wall of the student government office, with one sentence scribbled above it, "Let's stop pretending this isn't how it works." In a law office in New Jersey, a young associate who had been passed over 3 times for a client-facing role forwarded the clip to her manager. Nothing else, just the clip. In that moment, Jasmine Crockett became more than a politician. She became evidence. That silence can be the loudest testimony in the room. 3 days after the broadcast, While national anchors were still debating whether the memo was real, a local journalist in Toledo, Ohio, made a quiet phone call. Her name was Casey Lynn. She wasn't a star reporter. She didn't have a blue check, but she had patience and a contact list. That morning, while the networks chased think pieces, she tracked down the one person who hadn't spoken yet, the leak. Her name was Dana Haskins, 27, fresh out of grad school, first political job, junior communications assistant on Denzel Washington's team. She picked up on the first ring. "I was waiting for someone to ask," she said. Her voice was tight, not defensive, just scared. Casey didn't press. She just listened. And slowly, Dana started to explain. "It didn't feel like politics anymore," she said. "It felt like a setup, like we were writing character assassinations before we even read the bills." Dana had read the memo 3 days before it was finalized. She'd watched as the language sharpened, softened, then sharpened again. "It wasn't subtle," she said. "It didn't try to be. The goal was emotional provocation. Push representatives into overreacting, then use the footage to discredit them. One-liners were crafted, reaction triggers noted, names included. Jasmine's was underlined twice. I wanted to say something. I did. I brought it up in a meeting. Got brushed off like I was naive, so she sat with it. She printed a copy, took it home, read it 3 times that night, and again the next morning. It wasn't just strategy, it was personal. Dana had grown up watching Denzel, not the actor, the advocate. She admired how he stayed calm under pressure, how he didn't yell to make a point. "That's why it hit harder," she admitted. "I couldn't believe he'd be okay with this. I told myself maybe he hadn't read it, maybe it slipped through. But the signatures were there. He signed it. She didn't act out of rage. She acted out of dread. So when she found out Jasmine Crockett was booked for the Thursday panel, she made a choice. She mailed the memo anonymously to a friend on Jasmine's team. No note, no explanation, just the truth, printed in black and white. I didn't know what she'd do with it," Dana said. "I just hoped she'd do more than read it. I hoped she'd show the world how it's done. She never planned to go public. But when she saw how the media twisted the story, how they painted Jasmine as opportunistic and Denzel as ambushed, she couldn't stay quiet. People were asking the wrong questions," she said. "Not why did she bring it, but why was it written in the first place?" Casey published the story that night. No sensational headline, no gotcha angle, just a transcript, Dana's words, her reasons, her choice. Jasmine's team didn't issue a press release. They didn't call CNN. They just sent Dana one private message. "Thank you for having the courage we're all taught to suppress." The message wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. He didn't speak for 3 days. No tweets, no interviews, no cryptic reposts, just silence. People speculated. Was he ashamed? Strategizing? Waiting for it all to blow over? The truth was quieter than that. On the 4th night, Denzel went live. Not from a studio, not from a hotel conference room, from a small, dimly lit office in his home. Just a desk, a lamp, a laptop camera slightly off-center. No makeup, no graphics, no handlers adjusting his lighting or prepping talking points. He wore a plain navy t-shirt. A half-empty glass of water sat next to a dog-eared notebook. He looked directly into the camera, then took a breath. No music, no intro, just him. "I've been watching," he said. "Not the clips, not the headlines, the reactions, yours." He didn't apologize, and he didn't lash out. He just told the truth. "I signed off on a memo," he admitted, "and I wish I had read it more carefully. I wish I had listened to my gut instead of the voices telling me what would work. I wish I hadn't mistaken control for clarity." He paused, not to create tension, to think. "I've spent my life being told to be calm, to be clear, to be collected. My father taught me that. A Pentecostal preacher, man of few words. He believed you don't need to shout when your truth is steady." He smiled faintly, as if remembering something far away. "I forgot that," he said. "For a moment. On that stage, I reacted. I let myself be cornered by something I helped write. That's not her fault. That's mine." Comments flooded in. Hearts, fire emojis, a few hecklers, but mostly respect. Someone asked, "Why didn't you go harder? You could have destroyed her." He leaned in slightly. "Because I didn't need to destroy her," he said. "The truth doesn't need glitter. It doesn't need yelling or cheap shots. It just needs space." Another comment. "What do you want people to learn from this?" He exhaled slowly. "That calm isn't weakness. That silence isn't surrender. that when someone stays composed while being provoked, maybe we should stop calling them performative and start calling them disciplined. For 30 minutes he spoke, not about damage control, not about image, about pattern and pressure and the cost of listening to the wrong voices just long enough to drown out your own. He didn't ask to be forgiven. He didn't frame himself as a victim. He just let the weight sit in the room. By the end, the feed had over 200,000 viewers live, but it wasn't trending. Not yet, because some moments don't scream their way into history. Some whisper and stay. 2 weeks after the panel, long after the headlines had faded and the hashtags stopped trending, Denzel Washington stood behind a folding table at a community hall in Tyler, Texas. No press, no camera crews, just a cracked microphone, a half-lit room, and maybe 100 folding chairs, most filled with people who had only heard of him because of that one Thursday broadcast. The walls were bare, except for a hand-drawn sign, "Civic Conversations, come as you are." He didn't bring a speech. He brought a chair, sat with the people, listened. An older woman in the second row raised her hand. "I saw what happened," she said, voice soft but steady. "I gotta ask, how do you stay that calm when someone's trying to tear you apart?" Denzel looked down for a second, then met her gaze. "You breathe," he said. "You remember why you're there, and you realize it's not about you anymore. It's about everybody who never had a mic in front of them." The room was silent. Then from the back, a younger man stood up, maybe 25, wore a mechanic's uniform with oil on his sleeve. "Don't you ever feel like you have to be perfect just to be taken seriously?" That question hung in the air. Denzel nodded slowly. "All the time," he said. "But I stopped aiming for perfect. I aim for consistent. I aim for clear. Because the people coming after us, they deserve more than a moment. They deserve momentum. No applause. Not yet. Just breath." Then came a slow build. Claps that weren't performative, just real. Afterward, he sat in his car, alone outside the hall. The sun had dipped low, windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside. He scrolled through his phone, swiping past dozens of unread messages. One stood out. It was from a middle school teacher in El Paso. "My 8th grade boys watched your segment in class," it read. "One of them asked me, why did that woman get so mad when Mr. Washington stayed calm? I didn't know how to explain it. So I just said, that's what power looks like when you don't let people take it from you." He smiled faintly, let the message sit on his screen. It was never about winning the panel, never about shutting someone down. It was about showing people, especially the quiet ones, that clarity doesn't require noise. The next morning, Denzel posted one line, "Let the moment speak. After that, let the work begin." No victory lap, no mic drop, just a signal, because some stories don't end when the camera cuts, they begin there. And for the first time in a long time, people weren't just watching, they were listening.